A multi-talented guy, Chuck Connors was a beloved actor, professional baseball player, and basketball standout, but he is most remembered for his famous part in The Rifleman. But before he passed away, Connors finally spoke up, shattering Hollywood with a horrifying secret. For how long had he concealed this secret, and what was it? The man behind the cowboy persona needs to be understood before we can go into his surprising disclosure. In the year 1921, Chuck Connors set out from Brooklyn, New York. Kevin Joseph Aloysius Connors was born into an immigrant family from Ireland. Chuck inherited the values of perseverance and hard work from his parents as he grew up in the midst of the Great Depression. He was exceptionally gifted in baseball and other sports when he was a young man. He received a sports scholarship to a prep school after his impressive baseball talents garnered attention from the community. Because of this chance, Chuck was able to follow his passions for basketball and baseball. Seton Hall University was the next stop on Chuck and #039's athletic adventure. During his tenure there, he was a standout on the baseball and basketball fields. He became known as Chuck while he was a college student. He allegedly would frequently yell out, "Chuck it to me," as a way to motivate pitchers. His infectious enthusiasm won over his comrades and gave glimpses of the magnetic character that would serve him well in his acting career. A major turning point in Chuck and #039's athletic career came after he graduated from college. The Brooklyn Dodgers acquired his services in 1940. This was the first step on a path that would take 10 years through the lower leagues. Chuck put in a lot of time and effort throughout this time to hone his abilities and conquer obstacles. In 1949, after all his hard work, he was able to break into the main leagues with the Dodgers. This accomplishment demonstrated Chuck and #039's commitment and determination in striving for his objectives. Chuck had a brief but thrilling stint in the Major League Baseball. He was demoted back to the minor levels after just 5 weeks of play with the Brooklyn Dodgers, during which he got one at-bat. Some may have been disappointed, but Chuck saw this as a turning moment in his life. In 1951, after a brief appearance with the Dodgers, he had a brief spell with the Chicago Cubs. He signed with the Los Angeles Angels and #039 minor league club later that year. Chuck saw this as a stroke of luck rather than a setback. Even though he knew he would and #039 to make it big in baseball, the switch allowed him to explore acting, which was a completely new experience for him. Chuck was able to tap into fresh opportunities once he moved to Los Angeles, the epicenter of the film industry. Chuck and #039's transition into acting was slow and steady. Agents in Hollywood were captivated by his muscular physique and attractive features. He began to land bit parts in films and TV series. In the beginning, these components frequently had something to do with sports, players, or coaches. But Chuck put in a lot of time and effort to hone his acting chops, and he quickly started landing assignments that were more varied. After witnessing Chuck and #039's antics in the dugout, a casting director dubbed him the Diamond in #039's Laurence Olivier. In 1952, Chuck landed his breakout role in the film Pat and Mike, which co-starred Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. This opportunity was pivotal in the rise of Chuck and #039's Hollywood career. He portrayed an authoritarian father in the 1957 film Old Yeller. His versatility as an actor was on full display in this part. It was also a good practice for his 1958 debut in The Rifleman, his most prominent role to date. Chuck portrayed the role of an Old West hero named Lucas McCain on this show. He trained for the role by learning marksmanship, horseback riding, and stunt riding. His 6 feet, 5-inch stature and rugged good looks lent itself well to roles in westerns. Chuck became famous on television for his portrayal as McCain in The Rifleman. Although Chuck and #039's aspirations of becoming a baseball superstar were dashed, he discovered a more satisfying path to fame and fulfillment through acting. In 1958, ABC broadcast the premiere of The Rifleman, and viewers went crazy over it. When this happened, Chuck and #039's career took a dramatic change. The Rifleman stood out from the crowd because to its superior production values and compelling narrative. Chuck was crucial to the show and #039's success, and his portrayal of Lucas McCain came to represent the finest in television westerns. The show and hashtag 039's production also included Chuck. Chuck embodied the archetypal Western hero with his towering stature, muscular physique, and rugged good looks. He put in a lot of mental and physical effort to really embody the persona. He got a full beard and purchased his first horse so he could acquire the riding skills necessary for an Old West rancher. In every episode of The Rifleman, we saw Lucas McCain fend off threats to his son with the help of his trusty Winchester rifle. However, there was more to the performance than just fighting. The story revolved around the bond shared between a rancher and his kid after the latter and hashtag 039's death. The deep relationship between Lucas and Mark was what truly moved viewers, regardless of the challenges that arose each week. The Rifleman was a smashing hit for many reasons, not the least of which was the fantastic chemistry between Chuck Connors and his youthful co-star Johnny Crawford, who played Mark McCain. Despite his fame as a kid actor, Crawford won over his co-workers with his modesty and respect on set. Action and gun battles wherein and hashtag 039 the only things that made The Rifleman great. Honesty, justice, and fighting for what and hashtag 039's right were common themes. Despite the difficulties, Lucas McCain remained a man who sought justice and did his best. Because of this, he became an inspiration to a lot of people. Particularly the young men who admired this gentle yet powerful father figure. The show also made passing reference to the difficulties of being a single parent in a harsh frontier environment. As a father to his young boy, Lucas had to strike a balance between being a strict guardian and a caring, understanding parent. Compared to other TV Western heroes of the era, Chuck and hashtag 039's portrayal of Lucas McCain stood out due to his combination of sensitivity and strength. The unique Winchester rifle that Lucas McCain had customized was one of the film and hashtag 039's most striking features. Through the use of a specialized lever action, this one-of-a-kind weapon was able to discharge rounds at a machine gun-like rate. To convincingly and fluidly control this weapon on screen, Chuck had to put in a lot of practice time. Because of its unique noise and fast-firing action, the gun became practically a character in the play. It took a lot of effort to make The Rifleman, though. In order to capture the spirit of the Old West, the actors and crew frequently had to endure hot and dusty shooting conditions. Because of his background in athletics, Chuck Connors was well suited to the role and hashtag 039's strenuous physical requirements. The fact that he performed most of the stunts himself made the presentation seem more authentic. The writers of the show meticulously researched the 1880s era so that viewers might immerse themselves in the scene. They dug deep into the ranchers and hashtag 039 toolkits and studied the clothing they wore. Viewers were transported to the Old West alongside Lucas and Mark McCain thanks to the meticulous attention to detail. From 1958 through 1963, The Rifleman aired for a total of 5 seasons, covering 168 episodes. It was at this peak in its popularity that the show began to dominate television. Thanks to his portrayal of the courageous and ethical Lucas McCain, Chuck Connors became famous to millions of viewers. Thanks to the show and hashtag 039's success, Chuck was able to explore numerous new prospects. He began to receive offers for parts in films and television series. Still, a large portion of his fan base will forever identify him as the heroic rifleman Lucas McCain, who defended his son and championed justice in the Wild West. There was no mistaking Chuck and hashtag 039's commitment to the part. He logged a ton of practice rounds with the custom Winchester that McCain used on screen. This dedication demonstrated Chuck and hashtag 039's professionalism and added realism to the presentation. Athletes were frequent guests on Chuck and hashtag 039's show because of his passion for the sport. Guests on The Rifleman included Duke Snider, Sid Gilman, and Don Drysdale. For Chuck, this was a perfect opportunity to combine his two passions, acting and sports. Sports fans were captivated by these guest appearances, which showcased Chuck and hashtag 039's diverse talents. It was difficult for people to recognize Chuck Connors as anyone other than Lucas McCain by the time The Rifleman concluded in 1963. Chuck was faced with a challenge when the show ended. Ways to divert attention away from his portrayal of Lucas McCain when he plays other roles. Despite the difficulty, portraying McCain was a watershed moment in his career. Actor Chuck Connors also has a strong interest in politics. Chuck was a staunch Republican, which set him apart from many in Hollywood. Even at the beginning of his career, he was an outspoken supporter of Nixon and Reagan. In an industry where many people held more liberal opinions, this set him distinct. Curiously, Chuck formed an unanticipated bond with Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev. Westerns, like The Rifleman, were Brezhnev and #039's favorite television shows. Despite the tense Cold War relations between their countries, they were able to overcome it and become friends via their mutual love of Western culture. While in Russia in 1973, Chuck presented Brezhnev with a pair of unique Colt revolvers. Their growing friendship was evident in this. Some even go so far as to claim that Chuck facilitated covert communications between Nixon and Brezhnev, advocating for a rapprochement between the US and the USSR. A conservative, Chuck took great pride in his views. When Barry Goldwater ran for president in 1964, he was one of his supporters. Despite widespread opposition from Hollywood, Chuck nevertheless attended pro-Vietnam War rallies. He was a staunch supporter of the armed forces. Chuck was a huge Reagan supporter during Ronald Reagan and #039's runs for governor of California and president. He saw no conflict between his roles as an actor and a political activist. Those who knew Chuck well attest that he was deeply patriotic and believed that his political beliefs had no place in the entertainment industry. Chuck thought his portrayal of conservative Lucas McCain in the film The Rifleman was spot on. In his role, he portrayed a decent dad who valued fairness and family on the show. Chuck believed this figure embodied his beliefs, despite the complexity of his real life. Chuck was unafraid to voice his disagreement with the Vietnam War in Hollywood, where many individuals held liberal opinions. He was not shy about voicing his disagreement with some beliefs. Comedy shows that mocked westerns or Chuck and #039's role from The Rifleman were even offered to him, but he declined. He was adamant about preserving Lucas McCain and #039's reputation and all that the character represented. Some claim that Chuck had a hard time landing roles in Hollywood for a time due to his controversial opinions. This exemplifies the dangers of expressing divergent views in the entertainment business. However, there is something you were unaware of. Chuck Connors and #039's personal life was far from simple, despite his fame for playing decent guys on TV and his political views. In real life, Chuck Connors was far from the model dad he portrayed on television. He tied the knot with Elizabeth Rell in 1948 after they crossed paths in Canada at a baseball game. They were married for another 13 years and had 4 sons. The family may have appeared content, but Chuck was unfaithful to his wife. There were whispers that he fathered a few children from his extramarital affairs with other women. His real life in Hollywood was far more public than the family man he portrayed on television. It became public knowledge that Chuck had extramarital affairs even while wearing his wedding band. He wooed the female fans and actors he collaborated with by leveraging his reputation and attractiveness. Elizabeth was aware of his infidelity but was powerless to stop him. Their marriage was in shambles due to Chuck and #039's actions, but they put on a good front for everyone else. Chuck and Elizabeth and #039's tumultuous marriage came to an end in 1962 when they filed for a divorce. A year after that, Chuck tied the knot once more. Indian actress Kamala Devi became his new wife. Unfortunately, this union was not without its share of difficulties. Accusations of Chuck and #039's infidelity persisted for over a decade after the fact. Even in his own home, he was said to be violent. Their marriage was greatly tested by all of this. Co-workers of Chuck and #039's described him as having a wide range of personalities. While he could be quite kind at times, he also had his cruel moments. His complex personality came over in this. People didn't and #039 know how to feel about him. Even though he played the hero on TV, he struggled with numerous issues in his personal life and relationships. Chuck began seeing considerably younger women in the 1970s, when he was already in his 50s. He courted young women in their 20s who were models or aspiring actors by leveraging his fame from his role as the Rifleman. His relationships with women significantly younger than him were met with curiosity and consternation by many in Hollywood. Faith Quabius, who had a past as a Playboy bunny, was Chuck and #039's bride in 1977. Her age was less than half that of his. This marriage, however, was short-lived. They split up after just 3 years of marriage. Chuck seemed to be careless with his marriages and relationships at this period. His marriages would be short-lived. He pretended not to care what others thought of his affairs and made no effort to conceal them. Because of his fame from the Rifleman, Chuck appeared to believe he was exceptional. He pretended that the rules didn't and #039 apply to him, which his pals noticed. He had the impression that he could act irresponsibly and yet avoid consequences. In real life, Chuck and #039's behavior was very different from the decent parent he portrayed on television. He was careless with his vows to his wife. Chuck has an irresistible charisma and good looks. Still, many were wounded by his infidelity. A few of his kids have spoken about how they believed their dad was and #039 always present for them. The effects of Chuck and #039's actions on his loved ones were laid bare here. Everyone was confused about Chuck. A person they watched on TV turned out to be completely different when they met in person. Chuck was quite private about his personal life. Even though his actions were well known, he made an effort to appear morally upright. The extent of his infidelity towards his wife was only revealed after his death. This demonstrated how dissimilar he was to his TV character. Both Chuck and #039's professional and personal lives were difficult. Acting opportunities continued to come his way, although they were seldom as good as Lucas McCain and #039's in The Rifleman. He had a reputation for bad behavior in Hollywood, which made some individuals reluctant to collaborate with him. Because of this, Chuck had a more difficult time landing the jobs he desired. Chuck made an effort to maintain a positive public image despite his personal issues. A lot of his conversations would revolve around his time spent acting in The Rifleman and his athletic career. Many people still thought of him as Lucas McCain, the heroic father figure, and he was aware of this. Chuck maintained his popularity with his fans and continued to gain employment in Hollywood by using this image. However, Chuck and #039's family life was far from idyllic, despite his public persona. The offspring of his first marriage frequently felt neglected. Despite his portrayal as a doting father figure on television, their father was rarely present in their lives. As children, they struggled to cope with this. Throughout Chuck and #039's life, he had tumultuous relationships with women. His penchant for pursuing younger ladies persisted even into his twilight years. While some found it endearing, others felt it was too much for a guy his age. Thinking back on his life and the decisions he had made became more of a habit as Chuck aged. Some of his acquaintances claimed he felt terrible about his treatment of his family, but he never publicly acknowledged his infidelity or apologized. As he became older, he made an effort to spend more time with his kids and grandkids. After a hectic life, Chuck settled into a more peaceful retirement. He was still an actor on occasion, although he hadn't and #039 quite achieved his former stardom. He stayed at home more and made an effort to be closer to his family. Unfortunately, it was not easy to undo the harm that his previous actions had caused. Many people thought of Chuck when they heard about his 1992 death because of his role as Lucas McCain on The Rifleman. Their admiration for his acting and the character he played was unanimous. However, Chuck Connors was a far more nuanced individual to those who knew him well, particularly his family. Stories regarding Chuck and #039's private life continued to surface after he passed away. These anecdotes demonstrated how much he differed from his TV persona. It got people thinking about how real-life actors are and #039 always the same as their on-screen counterparts. The complexities of celebrity are illustrated by Chuck Connors and #039 life story. While his portrayal of an upright and trustworthy figure on television won him many fans, he had a hard time maintaining his faithfulness and being an excellent father in real life. The characters we watch on television often have quite different lives from what we see on screen, and his story serves as a reminder of that. In light of this new information on Connors, what are your thoughts? Does your opinion of him shift as a result? Please inform us in the space provided. Please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button if you would want to see more videos with your favorite stars.